by just turning off your video and, if you'd like, changing the name on your viewing screen. If you are consenting to be recorded, then we will start the recording now. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator for this evening. Our moderator is none other than Dr. Thomas Finger. Dr. Finger is a Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Fellow, Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, Stanford University. His previous position includes Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Analysis, 2005 through 2008, Assistant Secretary of the United States Department Bureau of Investigation and, Bureau of Intelligence and Research, 2000, 2001, and 2004 through 2005. He was Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary from 2001 to 2003 and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Analysis 1994 through 2000. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Thomas Finger to be our moderator for tonight.
Thank you, Pastor Deborah. Welcome to all of you who have joined us this evening, and a special welcome to those joining us for the first time. This series on faith and politics is an opportunity to examine and think about and perhaps change our behaviors as we confront some of the ways that our Christian faith encourages, requires us to deal with social issues of the world in which we live. Earlier sessions have discussed our responsibilities in a country that separates church and state, Christianity and restrictions on human freedom, and Christianity and income inequality. That the discussion leaders and the terrific discussion leaders that we've had have illustrated various dimensions of these important social and political issues, and the breakout groups that will follow the initial discussion provide an opportunity to discuss, hopefully comfortably, because you with a virtual room of other believers, issues that can be uncomfortable for some of us. Tonight, we're very fortunate, and we have another terrific discussion leader, Dr. Colin Krangel, who's going to offer us a spiritual perspective on gender and sex-based discrimination. Colleen is a former senior research scientist at the Stanford Medical School and senior partner in a Silicon Valley R&D company. She was an early innovator in machine learning and artificial intelligence in the field of healthcare. She was recently recognized as a 2020 Woman of Influence in Silicon Valley. Colleen is an immigrant twice over. She moved to the US first as a child of Irish parents, and then again as a young adult when she enrolled in a PhD program at Stanford. Colleen was the first person to take Stanford to federal court on sex discrimination and to win. She's been mentoring women and people of color facing discrimination in the workplace for close to 20 years. She's co-founder of Fault Line Press, which is an independent publisher with offices in the Bay Area and London. We're delighted to have Colleen with us this evening. And Colleen, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see, is the slide large enough for you, or do I need to make it a full screen? Okay, I'll leave it like this for the moment. Good. All right, well, I'm really glad to talk here about this subject. It is a lived experience for me. And I'm going to start by just asking you to consider this. Okay, I got to admit someone. Imagine a world where your phone is too big for your hand, where your doctor prescribes a drug that is wrong for your body, where in a car accident you are 40% more likely to be seriously injured, where every week the countless hours of work you do are not recognized or valued. If any of this sounds familiar, chances are that you're a woman. And if you've lately gone to the store to buy one of these COVID masks, one size fits all, and then you put it on and realize you got gaps here and gaps there and you're not at all protected, you're a woman. If any of this is news to you, you could be a man or a woman who is just unaware of the invisible bias that has a profound effect on the lives of women and girls. And I will show you on everyone. Is my Zoom covering my slides at all? No. All right.
No, you're good.
Looks fine.
It's getting in my way. Just two definitions, because we are talking about sex-based and gender-based discrimination. The distinction is important. Sex is the biological entity, and it includes physical features, chromosomes, gene expression, your anatomy. Gender is a socially constructed role, as the social scientists say. It's your behavior, it's how you express yourself, how you see yourself, whether you even see yourself as a boy or a girl, or whether you are gender neutral. Now, these are important distinctions to keep in mind, and particularly for sex, it is not just all about chromosomes. You can have an XXY man, you can have an XS woman who had a woman of XX chromosomes who still appears as a man because of the gene expression that is present in her body. It's not as cut and dried as people like to make out, some people. Which brings me to this question. So I'm talking about this view of gender and sex, but as many of you know, if you know conservative Christians, there's a no, but wait. What about the fact that God created men and women? We know this from Genesis. And one of their favorite rejoinders to any discussion about gender and sexual identity and sexual attraction is to say, God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. That's it. But most people who are conservative Christians believe that God created men and God created women for each other and assigned distinct roles and functions to each other. And my contention is that a rigid embrace of this proposition endangers women and all in the LGBT plus community, that is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, and other variations on those identities and experiences. Not only is this quite dangerous to women and people who don't fit in with the simple binary, literally people lose their lives, it also shortchanges men, and we're going to talk about how that is the case. Then let's just bring right up front, out in the open, the fact that if you, as a Christian, we often go back to the Bible. There's where we can get not only inspiration, but guidance. But when it comes to this matter, for one, in the Bible, you will find contradictions. You will find blatant statements that put women in a subservient position. The head of that woman is man, stated quite clearly. And then you come across these other statements that we all love, such as there is neither male nor female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. And Christians often get so uncomfortable with these contradictions and feel that they ought to choose one side or the other and then explain away all the scriptures they don't like. Well, I'd say you don't have to choose. You just have to recognize that the Bible is a text. It's the way words work, the way literature works. They're often descriptive, not prescriptive. Describing something doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. We don't have to choose bits of scripture. That brings me to another matter. The title, I have said, I want to share a spiritual perspective. So the difference between a religious perspective and a spiritual perspective is this. A religious perspective, typically, you are a part of a group that has an organized set of beliefs and practices, and at the heart of it is a written text, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, or some other text, and that text is taken as a supreme authority on all matters. This, I've already said how that is not a rational perspective to take, in my opinion. In a spiritual perspective, you're still recognizing yourself often as a member of a faith community or some other group, and your thoughts and values are informed by what you have read and what you talk about with that community of faith, but you rather identify general principles and values, and you use those mostly as an individual to guide how you act in the world and how you treat others. So that's a more that's a ground that some people feel very uncomfortable with. They want rules, but that's a courageous way to live, is to say we will work it out based on principles that we agree on, informed by our faith. So gender and sex-based discrimination doesn't really matter. Some people think it's much to do about nothing. I'm going to talk about 3 ways in which it matters. The first is modern slavery, the second, the gender wage gap, and the third, board and CEO representations. Modern slavery. Modern slavery is where people are exploited and cannot do anything about it in many, many different ways, in labor, in location where they're forced to live. And the fact is, women and girls are hugely affected by modern slavery, disproportionately throughout their lives, from girls to the end of their lives. 71% of all people who find themselves in this situation are girls and women. That amounts to 29 million women. And these include the forced labor, forced marriage, going into debt, and then being forever bonded because of that debt, and domestic servitude. This amounts to 1 in every 130 women and girls being identified as living in modern slavery today. The scope of the suffering is just hard to comprehend. And excuse me, one point I'd like to make is this: recognizing forced marriage as an aspect of modern slavery only took place in 2017. The various international bodies that work on these issues of global enslavement and what counts as enslavement, and forced marriage was only recently identified as modern slavery. Now, this is the only slide I have on this issue, and the rest of the things I'm going to be talking about are things that affect us largely as middle-class people in a wealthy country. But I want to make sure we don't forget that the consequences of sex and gender-based discrimination for millions of people are incomprehensibly painful. So, the second thing, does it really matter when it comes to the gender wage gap? Here's some of the facts involved. Women, taking all races, earn just 82 cents for every $1 earned by men. The really sad thing is you look how different it is for women of color, how much worse it is. For Hispanic or Latina women, it's 54 cents. For black women, it's 62 cents for every $1 that a man earns. These are real differences. But let's just look at the people who say it's not an issue. My favorite one is up there at the top. The wage gap isn't real. Men just tend to go for higher paying jobs like doctor, engineer, and CEO, whereas women go for lower paying jobs like female doctor, female engineer, and female CEO. And for people who say it's just not there, let me mention just one very recent event announced October 8, 2020. Princeton University is finally agreed to a payment of nearly $1 million to 106 female full professors following a federal investigation into pay equity. And more money is being put aside to close additional gender-based pay gaps. Those are very hard battles to fight. About 30 women and people of color, including me, fought that battle at Stanford, and that's another story. I want to mention another kind of argument, and I put it in black so we can know this is bad. But let's look at it. It simply is not the case that a woman and man doing exactly the same job get different pay because of their genders. Quite apart from anything else, that is illegal. And in a society as litigious as ours, if it were happening on any scale, we'd never be able to use the courts for anything else. Half the legal profession would be taking such cases on contingency fees. Well, our Princeton University event shows us that's not the case, and I want to address this point, which many people seem to believe, that it's so easy to take people to court for gender discrimination. It is almost impossible, as my experience showed. That's why I was the first woman to sue Stanford for gender discrimination in its long history and despite its many examples of discrimination. It took 3 years to make its way into court. It's of note that it took the jury under 6 hours to decide in my favor and to award more than we asked for in terms of punitive damages, but it took 3 years. And what was at stake was something like $2 million that I would have been on the hook for had I lost. Stanford hired 3 outside law firms as the 3 years went by and they saw I wasn't giving in. And they had about 15 lawyers and paralegals. I had 1 lawyer on contingency and a paralegal and me sitting in a room in Oakland. It is almost impossible to sue for sex discrimination. To get back to the actual issue of gender and pay, as I was preparing these remarks, I realized that 11 years ago I gave a talk at a high school. It was Blair's High School. 11 years ago on this wage gap, and I asked, what would you do with an extra 23 cents or $23,000 if we put it into amounts that matter? And 11 years ago, in 2011, oh, that was 9 years ago. Oh, I can't even do math. 9 years ago, women earned just 77 cents for every $1. It's not getting that much better. And to put to bed another argument is not that women are less educated. In fact, it's been startling how over the past decade or a little more, how women are leaping ahead in terms of education. You can see these up on the screen. Let me just point out that in undergraduate and graduate education, women outnumber men nearly 2 to 3. More than half of the PhD degrees are awarded to women. And in high school, you get the same kind of disparities. Women are not lagging behind in terms of what they're capable of doing and their readiness for jobs that pay the same. So why do we still have these gender gaps and these beliefs that it doesn't matter, maybe? The sad and disturbing fact, and this affects all of us, is that both men and women undervalue and underestimate women. It's now a fact supported by research that women in many different ways feel an obligation to be better prepared, better educated, better equipped all round than a man, any man, to take on a challenge. And we all fall into it. Women fall into it. We have a responsibility to watch out for that. Let me come to the next point. Women as CEOs and on boards. Talking about women in positions of corporate leadership, of course we must remember our beloved RBG, who famously said, women belong in all places where decisions are being made. And I want to look at the facts related to women on boards. First, I'm just going to tell you a few facts, and then I'm going to go to corporate boards, a few facts about leadership, particularly in the corporate world. As you can see, at entry level, men and women of color and white women have fairly similar representation. As you go down along the scale to more and more senior positions, manager, director, vice president, senior vice president, and then C-level, CEO, CIO, CTO, the numbers drop alarmingly, with just 19% of the women at the C-level in corporate. And this is a recent figure. I got it at the bottom, I think it's 2019. But this is my favorite look at it. It's a fact that more men named John run big companies than all women. So my advice to anyone who's having a baby or the grandchild coming along, you better name them John, David, Robert, or James, even if they're a woman, because they've got a better chance of running a company, a big company. Let's go to boards. The 2019 percentage of board seats held by women on the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, they're abysmally low. NASDAQ, it's 18.5% of the board seats are held by women. And on New York Stock Exchange is 22.3%. And this is represented by thousands of companies, almost 3,000. So why does this matter? First of all, let's note that a number of governments, India and parts of Europe and California, are pushing for greater female representation in the boardroom. In fact, January 1, 2020, law went into effect that required boards of certain sizes of the company to have at least one woman. And over time, and as the size of the company went up, they were required to have more women. And it is making a difference. But why should we have women on boards? Apart from the matter of equity, of the fact that women need to be everywhere where decisions are being made, gradually in recent years there's been some very convincing research. I mentioned just two here. The first was reported in the Harvard Business Review, 2019. It documented that having women on the board results in better acquisition and investment decisions and in less aggressive risk-taking, yielding benefits for shareholders, for everyone. Another study looked more broadly at what women actually brought to the board, and the expected one was a range of interpersonal and communication competencies that not all men have, or not as many men have. But not only that soft value did they bring. The second one is the one that interested me a lot. Women are more likely than men to ask questions and raise tough issues. I don't know if it's because we less worried about hurting a colleague's feeling, because there are fewer of us there. They also, and this is another one that interests me, and when you think about it, expected, women bring up a broader array of issues, and they recognize the needs of a greater number of stakeholders. And this is good for the bottom line, not just for the women who are on the boards. There are benefits to gender-balanced boards. So, is it enough to have just a token woman or two? Well, once again, we have research. Women need to hold at least 3 board seats for companies to reap these diversity gains. And we're getting up there if we look at the global numbers. 36% of the global boards had at least 3 women. We're going to move now to, very locally, to our own church. Are we living up to our principles and being good stewards of our resources in the way we govern? And I ask this question in the context of the board. The Book of Discipline, as you may or may not know, says of the Board of Trustees that there should be a Board of Trustees consisting of not fewer than 3 nor more than 9 persons, and it's recommended that at least 1/3 be lay women and at least 1/3 be lay men. This has been around for a while. They weren't relying on recent research. I think it's here because it's a matter of principle. Women should be in all the places where decisions are being made. And if we look at our history over 2017, those blocks of three, there's a little bit of data missing in the middle. That's people who are on the board 2017, 2018, 2019. They're moving on, add 2020, then add 2021, 22, and then 23. The tenure of the people who are on the board. And in the first place, back in 2017, we had 3 out of 8. Then we moved to 1 out of 9, then 1 out of 8, and 1 out of 7 women on the board. In a church that's so predominantly women, this is just odd. It's just odd, and it's not right. We look at the investment committee, which is another one of those arenas where men are supposed to be, have long been thought to be in charge and the only ones who can do it. The investment committee is also overwhelmingly and disproportionately men rather than women. Women belong in all these places. As I've presented these positions and thoughts about gender and sex-based discrimination and why it matters, moving from the global heartbreaking issues of modern slavery and the disproportionate effect that it has on women and girls, and looking at matters that affect us as middle-class communities, very privileged communities living in Silicon Valley here. And then I brought it down to our own church, our own environment. And as we think about this in our breakout groups, I want you to consider what are the principles that you think should guide our thinking and our actions on gender and sex-based equity. Then what can you do as an individual about the discrimination you encounter? And I'm thinking of in the family where it's very difficult to talk about these things, at work where you can put your career on the line speaking up about these things, in your neighborhood. There's an example of something that happened on our neighborhood list. Someone made a remark in which he meant to be kind. There was one poor homeless man in the nearby park, and someone sent out an email saying, I went by and he scared me, so from now on, all women and children should be accompanied by a man when they pass the park. In the first place, this man was not dangerous, but I was so shocked by that, I was obliged to respond to it. There is actually very important research that shows how much women suffer when you try to protect them when they don't need protection, despite the fact that that came from a place of kindness in his thinking. It's very disrespectful to women. And so I decided to respond to it. And to respond to it properly, I had to spend, I spent maybe 3 to 4 hours, because I looked up the research and I wrote it as carefully and politely as I could, but it had to be addressed. Women are not minors that need to be protected. So as you think about these as individuals, consider your neighborhood and your church, and then of course our country. And then what can we as a church do to end discrimination, gender and sex-based discrimination? Thanks very much for listening. Anne is going to take us out to breakout rooms.
Right. So you'll find the questions in the chat, and then we're heading to breakout rooms for 20 minutes. We'll see you back. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you,
See you in-
Colleen.
Okay. Did John get there? Yeah, okay.
Hi, Anne.
Hello, thank
Hi.
you.
I was aiming for 20 minutes, and I think I got it.
Yeah,
Mm.
no, that was good. Thank you. I'll pause the recording.
I apologize. Colleen,
Yeah.
at the beginning of your talk, I had to walk away. I received a phone call. One of our members passed away in the
Oh.
Fijian congregation.
Oh,
And she was calling me to let me know that her husband passed.
oh, you had to speak to her. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So please forgive me for walking away.
That's okay.
Hello.
We're back.
Hello.
Hello.
Pam, you have the most inviting smile.
Yeah.
You
It
do
must be
too.
my Zoom lens. I sometimes feel I look like those those dogs with the big.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, where they come up and they sniff the camera.
The ice cream cone.
I was going to say Cheshire cat, but
Well, we had a stimulating conversation and I can't wait till other people come back so we can continue it.
And so did we.
There they
Yes, and so did we.
we're all back, and we're not going to run through a group 1 or group 3 report. We're going to have a conversation with whoever wishes to start, make an observation, direct a question to Colleen. But the So Did We groups that had a great discussion. One of you want to start with what you learned or what you want to ask?
I think
Well,
what we decided is that we are our own worst enemies. It's really difficult for us to get past our assumptions that women aren't suited for a particular job, and if they are in that job, then they have to, do more, work harder in order to get the same recognition. But we were talking about that within the church, not out in the corporate world, but recognizing that, oh, trustees, that's a male thing. And oh, worship, that's a female thing. So it's, you talk to somebody about being on one of those committees and they're going to say no if they feel like they're the wrong sex, the wrong gender.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have ever thought of that. But we did talk about the fact that in terms of church committees, the Committee on Lay Leadership is responsible for recruiting committee members. And if they don't pursue women who say no and say, come on, you can do that, we won't make that much progress to getting a more equal balance of men and women on these committees.
Yep.
Women can do anything that men can.
Right.
Well, we also talked about when women get in those positions about the allyship that's necessary between other women and other men. Because when women get in those positions, we spoke that sometimes when a woman makes a decision or she makes a statement, then people continue the conversation. And a few moments later, a man will make the same statement that she made, and then everyone will think it was the best thing since sliced bread. And
That happens. That
It
happens.
happens all the time.
it happens all the time.
All the
And
time.
so how do we break that paradigm from women to be allied with other women and stand up and say, yes, that's a great idea. And for men to not think that unless they have the idea, then they can't stand supportively for someone else.
I haven't noticed that to be that much of a problem in our congregation. Clearly out in the corporate world, it is, but I really haven't observed that in the church. Has anybody else really observed that as a church issue?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
100%. Yes.
Apparently we have a lot of different kind of experiences, because I'm
That's
with
right.
Janet, that I
Yeah.
haven't seen that so much in the church. I've seen it a lot in the corporate world,
Yeah.
but most of what I see in the corporate world, I've been in situations where men and women were equally represented in management. And this whole thing about interruptions and ignoring is super aligned with power. It's about who has power and who doesn't. And gender doesn't really matter in the corporate world to the degree that many have said, but what does matter is power. And that power will be used to minimize an individual, whether there be a man or a woman. They will use their power without sexual discrimination at all, as far as I can tell.
That goes along with one of the points that I brought up, which is that men really, in whatever setting, I think they are frightened of the power of a woman, and in particular, if he happens to be his boss. I think it goes to another level.
Yeah. I had a boss not that long ago, and no, it's actually 10 years ago, and he had a couple criticisms, which I could not understand at the time. And then like 5 years ago, I thought, oh, now I know why he said that. He said, you always repeat yourself in meetings. And but I thought, he never listened to me. And then he would throw out the idea like his idea. And I said, I wish I could have said to him, it's because you never listen. But I didn't even think that. I couldn't imagine what he was talking about at the time. And now I feel like I should call him up if he's still around. And go, Bob, and he was a real guy. He had supervised thousands of women. He was a supervisor of the Richmond School District. And so he always supervised 1 million women. He was probably the only guy. And he was used to just talking over women. And I thought, oh, I just have to call him up.
Good.
Well, I wonder how we think that the same people who go to corporate America and oversee people there change their habits when they come to the church.
No, I don't think so.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't. So if that's the type of behavior that you're exhibiting in corporate America, then you bring those paradigms and those norms of behavior into the church.
One thing there was not time for, is to discuss, of course, the status of women in church, particularly in the Catholic Church, but in many churches, and the even more heartbreaking situation of the status of people with a different sexual identity and gender identity and sexual attraction. That is still a heartbreaking problem that bias, gender and sex bias, causes.
Colleen, so give us some insight on how we can go forward. One, we hear people saying that it doesn't exist. I've never seen it. I've never experienced it. You heard that spectrum. And then you heard people say, well, of course it has, So give us perhaps some tools, if you might, on how we might call it out or identify it whenever it happens, or what should we do so that we can move from this position where we are?
I have two very clear tests that I apply in every situation. First of all, I always look at the numbers. Numbers don't lie. And there's no good reason for this disparity we have on boards and in senior positions. It's not as if there aren't enough women in the pipeline. There was a pipeline argument for many years. Oh, we just need more women coming down the pipeline. You just have to be made to consider women for positions that previously they were denied. So always take the numbers seriously. If there's not a good reason, and there almost never is, then do something about it. The second is this switch it around test. If something is happening and you just switch the genders of the people and you say, is it likely that this would happen if that were a woman saying this or expecting this in that situation? And you'll be absolutely struck by the absurdity that we would recognize if in this situation a woman was saying or doing something that a man was. And this happens without our realizing it, because we're not we don't intend, particularly to people we know, we don't intend to lock them out or devalue them. But it's just there inside of us. Women as well, me, I'm horrified when I find it. I once went to get my car fixed and a woman approached me, said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to speak to someone about my car." And she said, "Yeah, okay." And I stopped. And in my mind, I thought, where's the real mechanic? And we have to watch those. It comes up in technology a lot. I've had that throughout my life. So it comes up particularly in these male-dominated areas, and we all have to watch. And then just do the switch and think if that were a woman, is it conceivable that a woman could do that and a man could respond in that way? It never fails. It also works for race. It's just shocking when you do that switch in racial matters. Vicky, you're on mute. Let me unmute you.
Vicky, you're muted.
Okay, unmute. I also wanted to say that we also need to think about that in the reverse, because we do have men who are in professions that are considered primarily male. And when we have a male who is in that role, we're still doing those same kinds of judgments that we do the men that we do for women who are in those roles. And I'm thinking in particularly, when you see a male elementary school teacher, and generally speaking, they try to channel the male teachers into middle school or high school positions instead of putting them in elementary or preschool positions. And so I think too that we have to be cognizant of those factors.
That's an important point. One of the ones that is most disturbing to me is when men's role as fathers is devalued, and they have such a hard time when a marriage breaks down, getting access to their children. And when we really think more openly about gender and watch ourselves, it benefits everybody. We get better boards, we get better corporate outcomes, we get a broader array of opinions, we have people who are not afraid to ask questions, and we get men who are allowed to live their lives freely, choosing careers such as elementary school teacher. Everyone benefits.
I remember overhearing a conversation once when Laura was in 4th grade and had this very handsome young man as her teacher in 4th grade. And one of the people at the PTA meeting said, how many years have you been teaching? And he said, this is my 3rd year. And she said, well, and now you're going to go for go into principal training. She just assumed that he was only biding his time teaching 4th grade, that he must be principal material. He must really have a career as a principal in mind, because that's what guys would do.
Interesting.
Yes, unnecessary pressure on him as a man. Yes. We do all
An insufficient expectation on women.
Insufficient, yes.
Right, that women would, of course, just stay and teach 4th grade their entire lives and never think of being principals.
Yeah.
Colleen, when you mentioned that about you have to catch yourself, I often tell the story about when I was working in Bell Labs, and I had a female supervisor. And when I left there and I went to Murray Hill, my supervisor there said, "Oh my God, who have you been working for?" Because I was so grossly underpaid. I was paid $20,000 less than what I should have been paid.
Wow.
And it was a female that I had been working for the last 5 years. And when I went to her after I thought, because I didn't know I was grossly underpaid, I was so happy to be there. I didn't know. I was so happy to have the money that I was getting. I had no idea that there was more money to be received, right? I was young. And when I went to her and I asked her, I said, gee, I was told I have been grossly underpaid working for you. How could you do that to another woman? And it happened to be an African-American woman.
And what'd she say?
Oh,
And she said, well, she said, when you get at this level, it's either me or you, because I'm responsible for a budget. And it's my job to make sure that we keep salaries low. And she said, and so tag, you were it. And if you were in my position, you'd make the same judgment.
Not a good manager.
I thought you were about to say something else, and that it's either you or me, because what unfortunately happens, and this goes back to your statement about allies, Pastor Deborah, is that women who do make it to a certain level, it still happens, get this strange feeling that I'm special. I'm very special, and that's why I'm in this position, and women aren't better represented. It's an insidious kind of arrogance that can creep in. And I want to return to the fact about needing to have 3 women on a corporate board before you see the value of the gender representation. You do need a certain critical mass of women. We need each other in positions of leadership, sometimes just to function. Nancy being spoken down, I mean, if another woman notices that, is there with you and can notice that, that's important.
Yes.
So, yeah, women also will not always look out for other women, but it's in their best interests and in everybody's best interest to look out for other women until we have better representation. The numbers don't lie. They never lie.
There is something that both women and men can do in those situations, and that is to say, Nancy just said,
Right.
XYZ. And I think that's a very good point, and I'd like us to pursue it further.
Yes.
And a man can do that as well. So often men will take that as their idea, or they'll bring it back to the next meeting as their idea, and nobody remembers that it was the woman who said it first.
Right.
But if immediately another woman or a man will come in and say, let's talk about what Nancy just raised. It's very important.
It is.
I had a boss, he wasn't a boss, but he was a senior partner in the venture capital firm, and he was very, very successful, very well known. And he took me under his wing when they hired me, and I was the only woman, and it was unusual. And every time he was on all the boards of the investments, and he always said, Nancy, you're going with me, and so you can get experience being at these board rooms. And we'd walk in, he always had me sit right next to him, and he introduced me and said, Nancy's my right-hand person. She's in charge of all the financials. If you have any issues about cash flows or strategy or financial plans, go to her. Don't come to me anymore. And right away, I became important in that room. He made me important, and I thought, wow, he didn't have to do that, but he had 3 daughters, all in business, and he was. Regardless of his age, he was so supportive of all the women that either we invested in or we worked with. And I thought, wow, that man was so special. I was so fortunate. And, when you look at the women who were successful in venture capital, there's so few. And the ones that have been successful all had a man like that helping them and giving them credibility in an industry was all men and with big egos. And, I was lucky.
I just want to make a remark on that, that when he recognized your superior abilities, I mean, let's really recognize the fact that he wasn't just being kind to you.
Right.
And kind to women. He actually recognized those.
Yes.
They were real.
Yes.
And that's what got you to where you are. And that's what got you your success.
Yes, yes. But he recognized it and he wasn't afraid to. And people, you know, people, there must have been 12 men around that table and they all looked like, oh, okay. But, you know, that really set me up for success.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Unfortunately, that sets a particular paradigm that it takes him to codify her experience.
I know, yeah.
But it does
that
though.
was, but that
I
was
mean,
a
it doesn't
while
take him
ago.
to, yeah.
But if these were simple problems, they would have been solved.
Right.
A little bit in our, when we talked about what I will summarize as top down or bottom up. Now, top down, you decree things like you got to have 3 women on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Title IX for athletics, the suit that changed the situation for women in the U.S. government. It's top down.
Yeah.
And no, that's the rule. That sets the pay, and things follow from that. And you get grumpiness and complaining along the way. There's also the bottom up, and that is part of the role for, I think, us as individuals to point out that's not right. That doesn't make sense. We are squandering talent. And expecting to do something about it as we move into positions where we can do something about it. But the secular trend is clearly moving too slowly, but at least it's moving in a better direction than it was a decade ago or 2 decades ago. On there, which is not grounds for self-congratulation or reduced efforts to get it to where it should be, which is regardless of sex, regardless of gender, regardless of orientation, people are people who want to be judged on contributions, capabilities,
Right.
and have the confidence that when in a position that once would have been denied, that the benefits to the larger community are apparent. That, I mean, either you believe that or you don't believe it. If you don't believe it, then you fight it. But if you got a basic level of confidence in people, then we can, I think, charge on to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean to hijack the meeting, but we have come to the end of our prescribed time and committed time. Colleen, do you want to have any closing remarks before we turn it over to Ann to make us disappear?
No, just thank you for the thoughtful discussion. And I again urge you to always take the numbers seriously and then just do the mental switch. Replace the sexes in whatever you're encountering. If you've got even a slight question about it, and then go forward to make a difference.
Great.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you. We're on next week with Nancy Glazer.
Oh, yes.
On principles, Christian principles and social justice. So see you all back here next week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Before you go, I am going to, before everyone goes, those of you who are still here, I want you to please remember in prayer our Fijian brothers and sisters. I just received a call from Mele saying that her husband passed away, and they're going to be having a memorial service for them this coming Friday. She's going to give me more facts as we hang up from this call today. So please remember them in prayer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Blessings. Be careful going to the next room.